Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 7Hz Legato, which is 7Hz newest dual dynamic driver IEM. And I have to say, this one had me excited because while V-shaped tuned IEMs aren't necessarily my first choice when it comes to tuning preference, it is something that I enjoy occasionally. And I do actually have a V-shaped tuning preference, which is basically the Sennheiser i600. It's almost a perfect V-shape in my opinion because it strikes a really good balance between having a really fun tuning, yet it still maintains really good technicalities. Now, of course, the i600 costs $700 and the Legato is only $109, so it's basically, 85% cheaper than the i600. And let's face it, it's no surprise to see another V-shape budget IEM hit the market. However, I did have a huge surprise with these when I sat down for my first listen. And I am going to tell you about it, but first let's go ahead and take a look at what's included in the box. So of course, we have the IEMs. They also include this killer case, a very good assortment of tips, and some extra nozzle filters as well. Now, of course, I already mentioned that the Legato is priced at a very affordable $109, and it has dual dynamic drivers. They have a 12mm dynamic driver covering the bass frequencies and a 6mm dynamic driver covering the mids and the highs. And both of those drivers are housed in these fully aluminum shells, and as you can see, these are very well built and designed. I like the simple shape and dark gray color scheme. It looks really good with a cable, but the overall build quality is just really good at this price. It also fits great, and so far, after a couple of fairly long listening sessions, I haven't experienced any discomfort or ear pain. And check out this case, and this is removable right here, by the way. It's kind of furry, but you can actually, if you want, you can take that out and you can fit a lot of stuff in there. And it's actually shaped to accommodate the cable and the shells of the IEMs. This is probably one of my favorite cases ever. And again, you get all of this for $109. So I went ahead and brought out some of the other IEMs that I have in the $100 price range. Now, of course, these have completely different tunings than Legato, which is kind of my point, because I've reviewed these recently, and one of the things I've been experiencing with these newer budget IEMs is that they've got these mid-forward tunings. Now, Timmy's, the Galileo, is not like that. This has a very balanced sound signature, whereas the Kima again has it's neutral, but it has some mid-forwardness that's kind of knocking it out of balance just a little bit. The same thing with the T4. These are both just a little too mid-forward for my taste. I have the Galileo out because I'm actually going to be using this as just a comparison, so you can see the difference between these two. This is closer to my preference. So, but back to the Legato. So when I first heard these had a V-shaped tuning, I wasn't surprised at all because, again, that's kind of what I've come to expect at this price point. Now, like I had mentioned, that is starting to change, and you're seeing more and more brands developing budget IEMs with a little more diversity in their tuning. They're trying different stuff. And I've, again, reviewed quite a few of these recently, like the Shimin Lee also, the T4 Plus, the Lan, and several others. But so far, none of those have really stood out or surprised me. Again, with the exception of the Galileo, it definitely surprised me. I still listen to this one all the time. That is an exceptionally well-tuned IEM for $100. And the Uranos also is a pretty good one. And it's one of the better tuned IEMs at the $50 price point, in my opinion. But it seems like it's been kind of hit and miss when it comes to tuning in the $50 to $100 price range lately. So you can understand why my expectations may not have been set very high with the Legato. But that may have worked to the benefit of the Legato, because when I sat down for my first listen, I literally got a huge grin on my face because it was much better than I expected. And it just so happened that the song that I chose was Lose Yourself to Dance by Daft Punk, which has killer bass, and it's just recorded really well. And look, I'm not saying that it was amazing bass quality, but it was for sure way better than I expected at this price. But let's start from the beginning and work our way up the frequency spectrum, starting with the bass. So if you look at the graph, obviously the bass is the star of the show with the Legato, because the bass frequencies are undoubtedly the most pronounced part of the overall signature. And by the way, I have to give a huge shout out to Ian Fan over at Ian Fan Reviews for giving me permission to use his graph for this video. And I know most people in the hobby already know who he is, but in case you haven't heard of him, I'd highly recommend you taking a minute, go over to his channel and check it out. Again, his channel is called Ian Fan Reviews. I have been using the Legato graphs, but Timmy hasn't graphed this one yet, so I reached out to Ian and he was kind enough to allow me to use his. And I guess I should also use this as an opportunity to give Legato a plug as well, because I do co-review on that channel with Timmy as well. I do all the DACs and DAPs, and he does all of the IEMs and basically everything else. But if you haven't checked out the Legato channel, I would highly recommend that you do, because Timmy's one of the most honest and knowledgeable reviewers out there, and his stuff just super high quality. And I love his channel, so please go check him out. Speaking of Timmy, just for fun, I'm going to pull up the graph of his IEM, the Galileo, just so you can kind of see the difference in bass levels. And there are some other areas I do want to point out as well. The Galileo, again, is also around $100, and his has more of a neutral style tuning and is actually quite close to my preference. So that should give you an idea of just how much bass we're talking about here. So the bass, again, is the star of the show. And if you look at the graph, you'll see that there's anywhere between 2 and 6 dBs more sub bass presence below 80 Hertz than any other part of the graph with the Legato. So that's a lot of bass. And then as you move into the mids and mid bass, you still have lots of presence, and it doesn't bottom out until you reach around 7 to 800 Hertz. But if you follow the graph, you'll notice a fairly steep rise from about 700 Hertz down to 80 Hertz, so the lower mids and bass. And when you have lower mid and mid bass quantities like this, well, it can do a few things. First, lots of punch and impact, especially if it's a dynamic driver. And also, because it's a dynamic driver, it's going to give you a more visceral or physical experience because it's moving more air than, say, a BA driver would. So that is the good part. And if you're looking for a fun IEM, that's what you want. But sometimes the trade-off with this amount of lower mid and mid bass is loss in detail in that frequency range. And that is definitely the case with a Legato. As a matter of fact, that lack of resolution kind of carries through into the mids as well. But the higher up the graph you move, the more some of that resolution starts to get restored. And if you look at the upper mids between about 2K and 6.5K and then compare it to the Galileo, you can see that dip around 4.5K in the Legato, and then that peak at 6.5K also. And as I mentioned earlier, the Galileo isn't too far off from my tuning preference, especially in the mids. Those dips and peaks with a Legato at between 2 and 6.5K are definitely noticeable to my ear. And while there is a fairly decent amount of energy with vocals and instruments in that area, it just seems like they don't sound as natural as I would prefer. And it seems like the instruments that are affected the most are pianos, guitars, and some horns also. And when some of those instruments are playing some of the lower notes that might reach down into the lower mids, it does sound fuller, and those notes have more note weight, but then they lose some texture and clarity. And then as they move up to some of the higher notes that might land in the upper mids, they start to regain some of that clarity, but then they lose some body, and the notes just don't sound as whole or complete, in my opinion. And my only guess is that it has to do with the tuning right there between that 2K and 6.5K. So the mid-range is kind of a mixed bag for me with a Legato. Now, as you move into the treble, you definitely start to have a greater sense of resolution and detail. And there's also enough upper treble energy to give you a good amount of air and sparkle. And things start to sound a little more natural in the treble as well. So cymbals and those higher stringed instruments sound much closer to what I would expect to hear in this frequency range. And in regards to technical aspects of the Legato, it does have a little more of a narrow soundstage, but it does have good forward depth as well. Instrument layering, separation are also good, and it's reasonably easy to pinpoint instruments' locations within their sound field. Again, it just lacks a little in terms of overall resolution. So let me try and summarize my experience with the Legato. Here's the thing, and I can't stress this enough. This is a bass head IM, and usually the goal is not to achieve high amounts of detail and naturalness. The goal is for it to sound exciting and engaging, and for the listener to have fun and simply enjoy the music. And again, we're talking $100. So taking all of that into consideration, I feel like I need to evaluate this from a couple of different perspectives and ask myself a few important questions. First, does it at least have a reasonable amount of resolution and technical performance? And does it sound natural enough to not be distracting or take away from the listening experience? And lastly, and maybe most importantly, as a V-shaped tuned / bass head IM, does the Legato deliver what I want? Which for me is an exciting, again, engaging, and just a fun listening experience. And for me, the answer is yes, and definitely yes. And to be completely honest, this is probably one of my favorite V-shaped bass head IEMs at or even around this price, because it definitely delivers that exciting, engaging, and fun overall sound. So as to whether or not I recommend the Legato, as long as you know what you're getting into and set your expectations accordingly, then yes, I do. Because if you want something exciting and fun that is also built very well and has an awesome case, by the way, for a very affordable price, then I believe this will give you that. So that concludes my review of the 7 Hertz Legato. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.